Hello, my dear students. Welcome to your English class. We were doing Henry a Chameleon. We were talking about chameleons. We were reading a story written by Ruskin Bond. So let us continue. But before continuing, today I have also brought a sweet, beautiful video about chameleons so that we will know the chameleons better. So let us watch the video first and then we will continue reading the lesson.
With their independently rotating eyes, color change abilities, their pincer-like feet, their long tongue that they project out of their mouth, and their slow, deliberate movements. Chameleons are animals that most people would regard as highly charismatic. One of the centers of chameleon diversity is Madagascar, and of the 202 chameleon species that are currently described to science, 42% occur on Madagascar. One of the old theories as to why chameleons change color was that they were changing color to match their background. But what we now know is that it's actually a communication strategy. Male-male combat will elicit some of the most impressive colorations from males. From females, on the other hand, if a female is gravid or she has eggs and is not interested in breeding, if a male starts to try and court her, she will display some very intense, vibrant colorations to let the male know that she's not interested. In 2015, scientists have discovered that the superficial layer of chameleon skin has pigments in it, and under that there are cells with small guanine crystals. Chameleons change color by actively tuning the spacing between these guanine crystals. And what that does is it changes the wavelength of light that is reflected off of those crystals and thereby changes the hue or the color of the chameleons. Now, chameleons have always been considered a master of camouflage, and some of that is actually behavioral. When chameleons are moving in the branches or moving along the ground, they do a very characteristic back and forth motion, and what they're actually doing is mimicking a leaf or a branch in the wind and trying to break up a typical movement pattern of an animal running from a predator. The chameleon tongue is actually a highly complex array of bone, elastic elements, and muscle. Chameleons can project their tongues up to 2 body lengths from their mouth. Now, this is done at speeds of about 5.8 meters per second or about 13 miles an hour. Tongue projection in chameleons is similar in a lot of ways to a bow and arrow. Before the tongue is actually launched, or the arrow, muscle action loads elastic elements. And so in a bow and arrow, that's when the arm actually pulls the bow back. Tongue launch is initiated by the recoil of those elastic elements that were loaded by the muscle action, or the release of the bow in the bow and arrow model. And it's the recoil of those elastic tissues, or that bow, that causes the launch of the tongue or the arrow in the bow and arrow example. 36% of chameleon species are threatened with extinction. There are 9 species which are regarded as critically endangered and 37 species that are regarded as endangered. The main threats to chameleons in the wild is actually habitat alteration and deforestation. Because some chameleons are found only in a specific type of habitat on a single mountain, this makes them highly range restricted. But when that range restriction is combined with other pressures on their habitat, a lot of these species become endangered. Chameleons have fascinated scientists and naturalists for centuries. It's something that we're still learning a lot about.
Okay, so we have seen that chameleons have now become an endangered species, isn't it? Because people have varied myths about them and they think that they are poisonous, and because of habitat destruction, these chameleons are also uh, getting less amount of food, and the habitat problems, they are getting endangered. Their life is even threatened. In the story also we see that how people were not aware of the realities about the chameleon, and they were trying to kill it, and Ruskin Bond's grandfather somehow manages to bring it home. And then Ruskin is trying to become friends with it. Let us see then what happened. We had read that Ruskin wanted to become friends with the chameleon, and chameleon was very cautious whenever Ruskin would come near it, isn't it? So let us read from here. Okay, that chameleon was Henry, and that was how he came to live with us. This we had read already. When I first visited Henry, he would treat me with great caution, isn't it? We had read caution means he was cautious, he was not very friendly, he was not knowing the why the narrator is coming towards it, or what is the real intention of the narrator. Sitting perfectly still on a perch with his back to me, the eye nearer to me would move around like the beam of a searchlight until it had me well in focus. Then it would stop, and the other eye would begin an independent survey of its own. For a long time, Henry trusted no one and responded to my friendliest gestures with great suspicion. Yes, because his uh, experiences with humans were not very good, so he did not trust anybody. For a long time, he did not even trust Ruskin and his family members. Then what happened? Tiring of his weary attitude, one day, cautious attitude, okay. Now, narrator was also a young child, so he wanted to play with that chameleon, and the chameleon was cautious, not very friendly. So one day, narrator became very tired. I would tickle him gently in the ribs with my finger. This always threw him in a great rage. So narrator would tickle it with his finger, and that made Henry very, very angry. He would blow himself up to an enormous size as his lungs filled up with air, while his color changed from green to red. So when he was cool, he would be green, and he was angry, he became red. Like your cheeks become red when you are angry, isn't it? He would sit up on his hind legs, okay, back legs, swaying from side to side, hoping to overawe me. So he would try to just show that he's bigger in size, so that he would just, narrator would be afraid of. Overawe means just afraid of the chameleon. Opening his mouth wide, he would let out an angry hiss. He would make a noise also. But his threatening display was no further. He did not bite. And Henry never bit the narrator. Henry was a harmless fellow. If I put my finger in his mouth, even during his wildest moments, when he was very angry, when the narrator would put his finger in his mouth, he would simply wait for me to take it out again. I suppose he could bite. His rigid jaws carried a number of finely pointed teeth, but Henry seemed convinced that his teeth were there for the sole purpose of chewing food, not fingers. So Henry was an intelligent animal, so he knew that that was a finger of the narrator and it is not for chewing. His teeth are there for only for chewing food. Henry was sometimes willing to take food from my hands. So sometimes he would take food, some insect from the narrator's hand. He did very swiftly. It is not slow but very swift, because his tongue movements are very fast. His tongue performed like a boomerang. What is a boomerang? A wooden tool which comes back to the person who throws it. Everybody knows that Mowgli had a boomerang, isn't it? And always came back to him with the food, usually an insect attached to it. Although Henry didn't cause any trouble in our house, he did create somewhat a riot in the nursery down the road. It started out quite innocently. So, narrator is telling us a story about how Henry created a riot, means a confusion, a trouble in the nursery school. So, let us see what happened when Henry went to the nursery school. When the papayas in our orchard were ripe, grandmother sent a basketful to her friend Mrs. Ghosh, who was the principal of a nursery school. While the basket sat waiting, Henry went searching for beetles and slipped in among the papayas unnoticed. So Henry fell into the basket. The gardener dutifully carried the basket to the school and left it in Mrs. Ghosh's office. Now, who is in the basket? Henry. When Mrs. Ghosh returned after making her rounds, mean just checking the school, she began examining and admiring the papayas, and out popped Henry. Henry came out of the basket from among the papayas. Then what happened? Oh my God, hell was let loose. Everybody was shouting. Mrs. Ghosh screamed. Henry squinted. So Henry started moving his eyes, both eyes revolving furiously. Furiously means very fast. Mrs. Ghosh screamed again. Henry's color changed from green to yellow to red. His mouth opened as though he too would like to scream, but there was no voice, not as loud as Mrs. Ghosh. An assistant teacher rushed in, took one look at the chameleon, and joined in the shrieking. Oh my God, another teacher came, but she also started shrieking and shouting. Henry was terrified. Now, who was terrified actually? Because of these two giant ladies, that little chameleon was terrified in the real sense. He fled from the office. Fled means ran away, okay? Running down the corridor and into one of the classrooms. There he climbed up on a desk while children ran in all directions, some to get away from Henry, some to catch him. Henry finally made his exit through a window and disappeared in the garden. My God, he saved himself. All the kids, some were afraid of him, some were trying to catch him, some are really not afraid. Some kids are really, really brave. So they tried to catch the chameleon. But Henry saved himself by jumping out of the window and disappearing in the garden. Grandmother heard about the incident from Mrs. Ghosh, but didn't mention that the chameleon was ours. It might have spoiled their friendship. Grandmother thought that if she tells that the chameleon was her pet, Mrs. Ghosh may feel sad. Grandfather and I didn't think Henry would find his way back to us because the school was 3 blocks away. But a few days later, I found him sunning himself on the garden wall. Although he looked none the worse means he looked seemed all right. For his adventure, he never went abroad again. He never went out of the narrator's garden again. Henry spent the rest of his days in the garden where he kept the insect population well within bounds. So then he started living in the narrator's garden, and there he controlled the insect population. How? Because chameleons eat insects. They are not poisonous at all. By Ruskin Bond. So I think you have enjoyed the story. Now let us do the exercise A. Take the most appropriate options. What do you find most unusual about the story? A chameleon can scare people, isn't it? What is there to be scared about a chameleon? If you have real information that there is no fear, all fear springs up because we don't have information, knowledge about something. If we have knowledge about something, then there is no fear. The residents of the area hurled stones at the chameleon because someone had said that it could poison people by spitting from a distance of 20 feet. Tiring of his weary way attitude, I would tickle him in the ribs. Okay, narrator would tickle Henry in the ribs. Okay, so then what happened? What was Henry's reaction? Here the writer is referring to the chameleon's indifferent attitude and not responding to the narrator's friendly approach. The chameleon did not bite the narrator because he probably thought that his teeth were for chewing food only. What was the reason for the commotion in the classroom? Henry had entered the classroom. Okay, now I think this is enough. This B, number these sentences in the correct order as they so according to the serial wise events you have to number the lines. So we will do that in the next video with the exercises and the question answers. So now you have to read the story, okay, and then try to do the exercise that we have left. So next video we can complete the exercises. I hope you are watching all the videos and completing, because only two periods we have in a week. Okay, so try to complete your lessons, and if you have any doubt, you can ask in your online class. Thank you, children. God bless you all.